Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. That song was We Didn't Start the Fire, and today we might not be starting your DevOps fire because a lot of us are already on that path, but we're certainly hoping to poke those embers, fan those flames, and in some cases we'll be dousing in gasoline for you. Now, before we get started, I've got a few important questions and I need your help. Can I get a show of hands of who in this audience today is a developer or some sort of software engineer? Just raise your hands. Okay, good few of you. And how about anyone from operations or ops teams? Yeah, I love the passion. And there's a few, okay, good mix, you're all in the right space. And now the awkward question, how many of you are maybe having challenges with your DevOps approach? Not going as quick as you want, maybe a few challenges with adoption, anyone? A few brave people at the back, excellent, we've got a lot here. And that's quite common actually. The 2023 State of DevOps report, it showed that 50% of organizations said that their DevOps was either medium or low in their maturity. So that's quite common. So we've seen this promise, this dream that it can provide around quicker deployment, fewer failures, but how do we achieve that? Even the most advanced organizations are having challenges around their security posture, around higher TCO, maybe it's lacking that central visibility, or even they're still having failures when they're deploying. So how do we make that a reality? Well, today we're not going to focus too much on the what or the why of DevOps, and we're going to focus on the how. Those practical tips and tricks that you can take back and implement with your teams and your people to hopefully have an impact. I'm Andrew. Today I'm really pleased to be joined by my AWS colleague Alex, and from EDF UK we've got Steve. And over the next 40 minutes or so we're going to follow that EDF story really closely. From the really early days of incubation, through walking the walk, to scaling up before looking at how they succeeded and what the future holds for them. So let's get started with getting to know a little bit more about EDF. So EDF UK is part of the French EDF group, and they are Britain's largest generator of zero carbon electricity through sources such as wind, nuclear and solar, and they provide that to over 3.5 million British homes and businesses today. Now, as it says here, they're on a mission to accelerate Britain's net zero. That's no mean feat. As you might expect, they're a large enterprise, so they have an existing technology function, and that was born out of building something that could scale and resilient, which is great. They are literally keeping our lights on. We wouldn't want anything less. But the energy market has been shifting. It's been moving at pace, and they need to keep up with that pace. So how do they do that? How do they innovate? How do they be more agile? Well, they thought that moving to DevOps and a product engineering and a product mindset could be the key to that. And this is really where we started the discussions of what does this promise hold? Well, at AWS we've been working with Amazon for a while in this space. And we've got a number of areas of how we think about this. And there's three key pillars. The first is all around cultural philosophy. This is the why, the vision, the principles that you're going to set out for yourself. Is this a brand that you think about building? How do you think about communication and collaboration? Second is all about practices, the how. How are you going to do this? How are you going to go about it? Are you going to use partners? Are you going to build internal teams? What does your org structure look like? What's the operating model? And the third is the tools, the what. What are you going to be doing to do this every day about building, coding, developing? How are you going to do your observability? How are you going to look at actually managing the things that matter to you? And these three areas form a really useful mentor model when building your DevOps community, your DevOps practice, and your DevOps approach. But what if we dig a little bit deeper? What were some of the things that we saw when we were building this with Amazon that we can share with our customers? And there's a number of key learnings. First is to break things down. Think of your technology and break it down to its smallest possible units. Here it can be useful to think about your data domains and use these as boundaries. Decouple based on your scaling factors. And each service should be independent. Some services will need to interact, therefore let's draw up a contract of how they will interact using APIs. Org changes. We'll talk a lot about org changes today. When you think about the teams, how do we make sure that they're autonomous? How do we make sure that your teams own a service and are responsible for owning it, but also have that ability to make decisions quickly and move at pace? Automation. Who doesn't love a bit of automation? Automate everything. Be aggressive here. quite often it can be useful to think about this and take a pessimistic view of what could fail, what could go wrong, and then I go and proactively fix that ahead of time. And manage the things that matter. There's going to be a lot of noise, a lot of data, a lot of things that are going to be pushed to you and your teams. So how do we manage those things that we really care about? Here it can be useful to think about different domains. If we think about our business metrics, we probably care about things like growth and usage. If we think about operationally, it's going to be things around errors or failures that we care about. Input goals. So what are the features and the use cases that we're trying to achieve here, and do we achieve them? And don't forget enablement. What are the things that we need to enable your people on, your teams on? Let's track that and make sure that we're pushing towards that, whether it be security, whether it be operational skills. But there's something else. There's something that hasn't been on these last few slides. And it's the thing that can be less tangible, but it can be the thing that galvanizes action. That's the spark. Your catalyst for change within your organization. Things that takes this from being an idea into something that you're actually delivering towards. And EDF had this spark in 2019. They needed to move and shift from operational stability to something that was more evolutionary, that was more aggressive and innovative, to keep pace with that changing market and also to meet those net zero goals. They had 3 areas of focus. First was that productivity and agility, to keep pace. But they thought that technology was a differentiator and could be empowered within their business. So how do they build IP and innovate upon that and retain that within their business? And once they find success, how do they repeat that? How do they start small and scale and build and evolve over time? This spark in these 3 key areas formed the DevOps tenets that EDF built upon.
So we walked up to this challenge in 2019 knowing that we wanted to deploy a DevOps operating model. We know that plenty of other people have done it, but equally it was hard. And through a lot of research and talking with partners, including AWS, we established these 6 guiding tenets. We found that organizations that had embedded their engineering into business teams and therefore moving away from this separate business and IT kind of mindset was a success factor. We know that putting those engineers into product engineering teams and actually having an engineering and a product mindset was critical. So moving away from that thinking of everything as a project to everything is now a product. And then moving on to how you then enable your product teams. How do you enable a group of engineers to build their services, support and manage those services, and do with as little friction points as possible? Automation is obviously a key part of that as well, so the 2 things go hand in hand. And finally, it's about people. There is no single answer to how you resolve a talent problem, I guess. We found that we wanted to retain our intellectual property within the organisation, but we also had to balance our use of partners for peak bursts and also for specialist skills. But above all, what we wanted to encourage and what we saw great success elsewhere was a culture of collaboration. So rather than individual silo product teams and fiefdoms, it was about how do you create a practice or a community of engineering. So with those tenets in mind, we outlined a set of pivot points. So where do we go from today? How do we shift to where we want to be going? So shifting from an IT delivery mindset of a central IT delivery function, almost an order taker, order placer mentality, to putting DevOps skills within our business teams so that they can build and manage their services themselves. Shifting from project to product. There's plenty of really good books on that particular topic, which encourages the concept of MVPs and a greater level of ownership rather than the project has to be done and then everyone disbands. And also moving from a model of outsourcing all of our IT and our delivery to right sourcing. So we certainly didn't want to bring it entirely in-house because we wouldn't be able to scale, but there's a medium ground in the middle. How do you retain your intellectual property within your organisation? How do you foster and nurture your talent? But also how do you leverage and get better value from partners? We also need to shift the mindset from a world of governance to enablement. So many large organisations, and EDF is no different to any other one. IT is very much a governing entity. It's there to stop bad things from happening for good reason. And it's how we then shift that to a world of enablement. So how do you enable a team of federated engineers to build and run good services, and how do you give them the guardrails to do so in a safe manner? And then finally, we talk about the shift from silos to communities. Most organizations are large, there's a lot of technical folks involved, and there's a real propensity, particularly when you shift to product teams, to create silos. You know, most product teams, 9 times out of 10, their sole focus is building the services and running the services that their product team supports. So how do you create a community that allows people to interact across different teams, to share knowledge, to kind of share good ideas, best practice, and collaborate? So, where do we get started? I'm describing it as 3 kind of distinct phases, but actually it was a linear succession, iterations, if you will, over the last 4 years. We were fortunate that we had really strong exec buy-in, not only from our business directorate, but also from our central IT functions and security functions. Everybody knew that there was a problem and we wanted to solve it, but we just weren't quite sure how to do it. So we decided to run an incubation program where we formed a product team, brought a bunch of people from the organization that had a set of skills and a desire to evolve to product skills, to engineering skills, and to grow those. And we also augmented it with a partner. And that's kind of where we started our journey. So we'll come back to the 3 core pillars that Andrew talked about earlier. From a cultural philosophy perspective, it was all about how do we leverage the great talent that we already have in the organization. I mean, EDF has been running production workloads on AWS for the last 10, 11 years. We have great expertise there, we've got a strong architecture function, and we've got strong product mindset, albeit just the execution was a bit lacking. So the simple answer is you identify those individuals from the organization, you give them the opportunity to work within this newly formed product team, and you augment them with a strong partner that we got recommended by AWS, who have a proven track record in actually coming in and helping to evolve organizations with DevOps skills. So this was as much about delivering a product as it was about learning how to deliver and manage a product. We used the same partner to inject engineering skills within that team, and we also found quite a few internal folks, including myself and a few others that I know in the audience, who worked as part of that incubation period to take those newly acquired engineering skills and start to grow them and bring them back into the fold. And finally, we started that initial journey of a culture. What does this culture look like that we're trying to create and foster? And it's largely about empowering and upskilling people. And if you do that, those individuals become your messengers. They go out and evangelize about how good that process works. They say product engineering and DevOps is the best way of working. We don't want to go back to waterfall. And that's a real helpful tool to help evolve. From a practices perspective, as I say, we created a central product team, and that included representatives from our central IT function and security function, because they needed to help evolve the change as much as everybody else did. We recognised that there was a need for a level of multimodal operating, and I'll come back to that point a bit later. You know, unless you're a small company, there's generally no size fits all. And we also realised quite early on that from a practice perspective, having governance baked into code rather than governance being asking people or getting reviews was absolutely the right thing to do. From a tooling perspective, we were pretty lucky in so much as we've been running production workloads on AWS for 10, 11 years, so we knew how to use AWS. However, we were probably guilty of running and using AWS like a data center in the cloud. So our use of AWS had to evolve, and this really included all the kind of fairly obvious DevOps things like moving to everything as code, so lots of use of Terraform, lots of serverless architectures in favor of perhaps more traditional EC2s, use of GitOps, use of code build, all those great CI tools. We also recognise that a key enabler in that is, rather than having a single AWS account to put everything in, and instead to have separate AWS accounts for each of your teams so they could be autonomous, there was a missing part of that jigsaw puzzle, and that was the account vending pattern.
Thank you, Steve. So in terms of the account vending pattern, as Steve mentioned before, they used to have one account which was managed by a team, and if anyone wanted to do any development, they had to raise a request, wait for the request to be completed, and get their own infrastructure. And this was taking weeks for them, and also once the infrastructure was provisioned, it was sometimes difficult to manage, see who owns different parts, and there was no isolation. So in the spirit of DevOps, they wanted to give more power to their developers, and they wanted to allow them to provision their own environments in the form of account sets, and they still had a governance in the form of the central IT team, which was provisioning a vending account, and that vending account was using Terraform and code build to create the account sets. And once they had the account set, developers could experiment in a sandbox account and have direct access to build their POCs and make sure that what they want to do is technically achievable. And when they were happy with the results, they could push their changes, push their infrastructure as code to a GitHub repository, and that was then provisioned again with AWS code build to a non-production account and a production account, so they have so they can replicate their environments. And yeah, okay. So they were able to reduce their time to provision accounts from weeks to days, and that was not only to get the environments, but also to begin their experimentation phase as well.
So we started small. We've mobilized a single incubation team. We built a single set of products, and that was deemed by our stakeholders as a success. Hopefully so, otherwise I probably wouldn't be up here talking. Our next stage was to take that initial seed that we've propagated and to grow it further. And in this particular transition, this is where we had a clear mandate to continue with this way of working, so to continue to grow our DevOps capability, to continue to grow our desire around product engineering. And therefore we're now going to talk about kind of what those next evolutionary stages required. The key thing for us was talent, and it still is talent. Talent is probably the most important part of any kind of transformation. We now had to effectively learn to ride without the stabilizers on. So we had access to our partner that helped us evolve, but their success and goal was to basically exit and to leave us to be able to do it ourselves. So that required us to basically start from scratch. We hadn't had engineering skills within the organisation, and therefore we had to start with the basics, like what does the culture look like that we're trying to build, what do the roles look like, you know, what are the salary bands, all that kind of quite mundane things at times, but the important foundations. And we started that with the guidance from our partner, and started that treadmill of recruitment and building up more and more people. At the same time, we recognised that like any organisation, we need a pipeline of talent, and as somebody who's middle-aged and hopefully retiring at some point in the future, we need to bring some fresh talent in. So that was the same point where we started our data and tech graduate scheme, so that we get new talent in from our graduates, that new injection of skills and enthusiasm. From a cultural perspective, again, the theme around culture is pervasive around this talk. We based all our roles on our kind of competencies and our expected behaviours around that contribution mindset. As an engineer, you're employed by EDF to work in a particular product team, but you're also part of that wider community. So that kind of that is baked into our kind of DNA of like the day job is not just working on the product teams, it's making sure that you're active in that community, helping other engineers to succeed as well. From a practices perspective, the easiest way to evolve is to do more, and that's exactly what we did. So we went from a single team up to about 7 teams, I think, in the first year, where we cherry-picked a few candidate projects and actually got those delivered via this particular way of working. So we used the project to create a product team and to create a product, and to both deliver that and then run it from an enduring perspective as a product team, and using all the DevOps concepts we talked about. This also allowed us to evolve the DevOps mode of operation and the model. The easiest way to kind of work out how you're going to do something is to just crack on and do it. There's a little bit of spotlight around what we call our operating mode. So as I said earlier, there's typically no one size fits all for most organisations, and EDF is certainly no different. There are times when having a completely managed service by a central IT function is absolutely the right thing to do, because it's not differentiating, it doesn't create value, it just becomes something that keeps the lights on, and in many cases keeps you out of jail. We also recognise on the flip side that being able to do it all and to empower product teams to work required a new way of working. So our mode 3, or DevOps mode, became our additional operating mode that we outlined. And what you can see from that diagram is just the kind of pivot from the central IT function doing everything to doing some of it, and the business teams doing some of it, to DevOps, which is pretty much the entire business teams do that. And I think having guidance around that, which I'm more than happy to talk about later, around which mode you choose for which particular product is important. From a tooling perspective, it was just a general evolution. So by this time, we've had plenty of teams using AWS. We'd started to amass a library of Terraform modules and shared code and patterns and all that kind of good stuff. We also started to take that landing zone pattern, or the vending pattern that Alex talked about, and actually turn that into code, so that rather than being a traditional request process, it was simply a GitOps process. You know, I raise a pull request on a YAML config file, and a bunch of accounts get set up within minutes rather than days. We also use this to bake into those accounts the guardrails, which are important, and also to really instantiate a strong culture around serverless first. And I think at this point in time, we're still now running 98% of our services are serverless rather than EC2s and Kubernetes. So this is a quick spotlight on one of the solutions we built, and I'll let Alex go through the detail, but this was built in response to a regulatory requirement of how EDF needs to interact with the energy industry. Like most industries, we need to pass data back and forward to other companies and central bodies, and as a result of a regulatory requirement, we had to build a webhook. We built this solution in under 6 months because of this way of working, because we were using serverless and because we were operating in this federated landing zone approach where our engineers had the ability to build things quickly and unrestrained.
Yes, thank you, Steve. And so just a few things that I want to highlight here. This event-driven architecture was provisioned in one of the account sets, which was vended from the account vending machine, and that allowed developers to get started quickly and experiment to make sure that they meet the regulatory timeline. And you can notice here that there are quite a few managed services, which means that there is no infrastructure that Steve's team needs to manage. They can just focus on the configuration and the business logic that they need to develop, rather than provisioning and managing infrastructure. For example, here they're using API gateway to have a managed API, and that then sends the request to EventBridge, which is our serverless event bus, and that also has the function for routing, and this is done through rules. And as you can see here, we have rule 1, which reads information from a database. We have rule 2, which stores a file to an S3 bucket, and then we have rule 3, which is invoked if there is an error, and that triggers the engineering team. And because this is all serverless and using managed services, it's very easy to extend without disrupting the remainder of the architecture. And with something like Lambda, for example, which is our serverless compute, they can just focus on the code and not having to provision any servers.
Great stuff. So as you can see from the timeline down the bottom, we're up to sort of late 2020, 2022. We've got around about 10, 11 teams now, product teams using DevOps as their main way of working. And it's fair to say that from this point onwards, we've normalized DevOps. That's been our measure of success. So any future delivery that our business teams want to do, they're now doing so via the creation of a product team and using DevOps mindset and delivery processes to build and manage those solutions. But we were still needing to scale up, and in order for this to be a credible, enduring and high scale approach, we needed to look at a couple of key areas. Firstly, our use of partners and how we better engage with those and use them to help us with our sort of feast and famine, boom and bust type delivery and demand. But also, we'd now built up a bunch of product teams that are now supporting and running live applications, and there's some great learning that we got from that, where we were starting to groan and creak using the sort of out-of-the-box monitoring and observing capability. And I think also we found that we weren't thinking about building or designing to run as well, which was a key tenet. So for this one, what do we do? So partner evolution was a key one. So EDF has a great set of partners that we work with, and rather than sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, it was really a case of sitting down with those and saying, how do we move you from an approach where we give you and we outsource the work to a world where we ask you for additional skills and capacity when we require it, so that the skills and the talent come in, they help the business deliver what they need to do, and then the enduring DevOps teams can continue to run and operate those services. We also started the spark around an SRE mindset and observability mindset. So getting our engineering teams to think of SRE as just an extension to DevOps. So you're going to build it and run it, that's great. But how do you ensure that when you build and design it, you're building with failure in mind, you're building optimism, you're building observability, you're building metrics and telemetry and so forth, so that when it does fail, which it invariably does, you can fix it and correct it much quicker. From a talent pipeline perspective, we started doing it ourselves. Our initial foray of using recruitment agencies got us so far, and one of the key findings that we had with that was people do business with people. So if you're looking to recruit talent, you need to create a brand and a face of what your culture and your organization looks like. And that was the start of our data and tech brand that we've established. And that acts as many kind of value propositions. It allows us to showcase the work we're doing, but it also allows us to showcase how we operate as a company, what our engineering kind of culture looks like, who the individuals are, and how we do that. From a practices perspective, labouring on the SRE side of things, it's really making sure that SRE is everybody's job. So if you're in a product team, it's not just the engineer's problem if the site's unreliable or it goes down or there's a data issue, it's the entire team. It's the architect, it's the product owners, it's the analysts. And I think getting that observability mindset embedded into all of those individuals was key, and I think that's also helped us evolve our SRE practices, which we'll talk about a bit later. And if any of you attended Jodie's speech earlier with Dynatrace, you probably would have seen that there as well. The other key thing, and again this came out of the Dynatrace presentation earlier, is thinking of customer experience when you're talking about observability. I think as technical people, we're very good at talking about Lambda functions failing or disks running out of space or servers running slow and all that kind of low-level technical thing. And for us, it was about how do we bring those up a level and talk about anchoring the importance of site reliability, particularly with product owners. And this is, again, from a tooling perspective, this is where we brought Dynatrace in. So this helped us evolve not only centralizing the metrics and the data and giving that single pane of glass, but it also triggered another sort of spiral of additional things to do, like ensuring that we had structured logging so that it was consistent and easy to use that data, and also tagging, which is a big bugbear of mine, but if any of you have used AWS and are aware of tagging, it can be so incredibly useful for ensuring that when something goes wrong, you can route that problem to the right team and the right owner. We also evolved our security automation at this point, and to do that we looked at the classic sort of manage code before it goes into production, or manage code before it goes into GitHub, but also how we manage the code when it's actually running as a runtime. So for the pre-commit level, we've got Dependabot and Chekhov scanning, looking for over-promiscuous roles and responsibilities. Dependabot's helping us manage dependency issues with NPM libraries, which are always bumping themselves. And finally, we looked at the use of Inspector, which helped our security posture around our cyber essentials.
Okay, so let's look at EDF setup for their Amazon Inspector. As you can see, they have Amazon Inspector deployed on each of the accounts, which are provisioned by the account vending pattern, and each of the teams and the product teams can see what vulnerabilities are open against their infrastructure, like EC2 instances, containers, and Lambda functions. But they also feed all of the accounts across the organization to a centralized security account, and this allows their centralized security team to get an overview across the whole organization and understand their security posture for reporting purposes, and they can also follow up with the respective teams to make sure that they have a remediation plan. Another thing that Steve mentioned is observability. I used to be a site reliability engineer myself, so it's a topic that's very close to me, and for their purposes, they're using Dynatrace as their single pane of glass. And on the left-hand side, you can see that they have different data sources. So, of course, their AWS infrastructure, but also their on-premises environment and their end-user laptops as well. And all of these sources are sending data in terms of logs, metrics, and traces to Dynatrace, and that allows the teams to have an overview of customer journeys. So you no longer need to worry, as Steve mentioned, is a server running under high CPU, or are there latency anywhere, but is the customer experiencing what they should be experiencing? Is there a journey fault? And then, because everything is in one place, the teams can drill down and say, okay, I see that there is a dependency here, and this is causing a problem with the sign-on journey, for example. And then on the right-hand side, they've also integrated Dynatrace with Jira for tickets, for example, if there is a bug report that needs to be submitted and resolved, and also with ServiceNow if there is an incident that needs to be triaged and investigated, and they're also alerting their teams using Slack.
So did we succeed? I'd like to think so, because I would look a bit silly if I was stood up here talking to you and we hadn't. So we go back to the 3 initial success metrics that Andrew set out around productivity and agility, IP and innovation, and repeatable success. That's pretty much the answer. So from a productivity and agility perspective, we've managed to achieve a greater speed to market, and that's recently demonstrated with a large transformation program that we've run in certainly less than a year. We've also got a much lower incident or much higher incident response capability now, because issues are detected by the actual DevOps teams themselves and triaged and fixed quickly rather than going through a sort of centralized service desk approach, and that slows things down. From an IP and innovation perspective, we've right-sourced. We've built up a strong pipeline and talent of internal engineers. We've got our graduate scheme. We've also got apprentices that are now running as well, and we're using our partners better. We've also got that culture and the communities running well as well. So, you know, we've got engineers that feel part of a wider software engineering practice and are contributing to the success of that. And finally, we've got repeatable success. This was not intended to be a one-off exercise. The goal was very much to build something that could be replicated multiple times at scale, and we've done that. We've normalized DevOps, we've normalized product thinking and product engineering, and we've built a strong talent pipeline, and we've got a strong data and tech brand. So here's a quick timeline, really, because Rome wasn't built in a day. It's taken us probably 4 years from the inception, and we're now in a space where DevOps is normalized. Our product engineering is normalized. We've got roughly 200 plus engineers across our estate, which include internal engineers, partners, as well as our graduate scheme, and we've got 30 odd product teams. So where next is very much to scale this across the rest of the UK operation. So a couple of success tips to cover off really. Fostering curiosity is a key one. Most organisations have got good people. Find those good people, give them a reason to be curious, a reason to help out, and a reason to grow. That's a really important one. Find and attract talent. Talent's hard, good people leave, that's just a fact of life unfortunately, but equally you get good talent from other companies. So it is a bit of a treadmill, but just respect it and just continue to nurture it. But above all, don't sacrifice your kind of behavioural norms in order to get people in. Culture is king. I mean, that's hopefully goes without saying, but a good culture will breed good culture. So being very clear about what your engineering culture looks like, making sure that that's baked into your recruitment process so that you're bringing people in that share that same culture and mindset is super important. And finally, start small and validate by doing. Don't procrastinate, just get on and do stuff. And if you start small, the failure count is much lower as well. None of these journeys are completely linear, so you will fail at some point, but the idea is you fail small and you iterate and you keep growing.
Awesome, thank you. So you've heard about EDF story so far. Now I want to talk a little bit about what's next for EDF and maybe for you in the audience in terms of your DevOps adoption. So even with the iteration and adoption of the different DevOps practices, there are still a lot of laborious tasks that developers need to go through in the process of writing code. So first you have kind of the planning and understanding phase where maybe you've started a new project, it's using new libraries, maybe a new language, so you need to figure out where your gaps are and what you need to learn. Then once you've picked your technology or you understand it, you still need to plan and prioritize what do you need to do next. Maybe you need to make some architectural trade-off decisions as well. And once you have your plan, you can start developing. And again, with the development, when you start a new project, maybe sometimes you need to set up boilerplate code or you need to solve trivial tasks over and over again. Then you need to make sure that your code is compliant with your security practices. Maybe you have some controls that are in place. Maybe you need a process that makes sure that vulnerabilities are fixed under a certain amount of time. So you need to consider that as well. And as you're developing, you're constantly monitoring and testing to make sure that your application is working as well. So sometimes there is some troubleshooting involved. And lastly, of course, you need to own it, as Steve mentioned, you need to maintain it, you need to update it. So all of these things take a significant amount of time for developers, and that's something that you can benefit by optimizing. So last year at reInvent we announced Amazon Q, which is currently in preview, and this is our generative AI assistant which can help you in all the places where you interact with AWS, if that's in the console, in the documentation, or in your integrated development environment. So it can help you in that planning phase when you're learning a new library, learning a new programming language. It can help you get started. Then as you're developing, you can use Q in Code Whisperer to ask it questions and get tips on what code to write and what functions maybe you need. It can also help you with feature development based on your existing code base. And as you're deploying your code, it can help you with troubleshooting in the console as well. And lastly, of course, it can help you with updating your Java applications from Java 8 and Java 11 to Java 17 with Q-code transformation. I also want to talk a little bit about Code Whisper, Amazon Code Whisperer, which is a productivity tool that sits inside your IDE as part of the AWS toolkit, and it generates code for you in two ways. You can either prompt it with comments inside the code, or you can just type your code and it's automatically going to suggest maybe next functions or next variables that you might want to use next. So it makes it a little bit easier to develop, so you don't have to context switch with documentation or searching online or using some other resources. In the spirit of DevOps, it also helps you kind of shift some of your practices left and start doing them sooner. For example, you can scan your code for vulnerabilities directly in your IDE, so you don't need to rely on your CI/CD pipelines, on your runtime agents. You can get this scanning inside your IDE. And Code Whisperer is currently generally available, and as our customers have been using it, one of the feedbacks that we got was that a lot of customers have proprietary code that is not open to the public, and maybe it's quite custom. So it would be great if you can actually tailor the recommendations based on your internal libraries or internal code repositories. Well, you can do that with Code Whisperer customizations, where you securely link your existing repository and allow Code Whisperer to make recommendations based on that. So whether you're just starting on your DevOps journey or you have already been through that cycle and you're looking for continuous improvement, I recommend having a look at Amazon Q Developer and Amazon Code Whisperer to help you on your journey.
Excellent. So we've covered a lot today, and we had a few key messages that we want to wrap up and summarize with. But while I go through this, feel free to scan the QR code. We pulled together a lot of resources, not only from AWS, but also from EDF that we felt would be useful for you today. So there's a few key things that we think we want you to leave with. The first is to make a plan. Make a plan that's relevant for you, your teams, your organization. Make sure that it's not too lofty and it builds in increments. Sometimes we can look at that final goal and feel like it's too daunting. Well, actually, let's build that up over time. Find those key people in your organization, those evangelists, those people that can, either if you're starting early, go and build your DevOps practice, or if you've already scaled, just help you scale it further. Those ones who are passionate, that understand DevOps, that can go and work with your application owners and start to deliver success. And finally, review regularly. Review, are you managing the things that matter? Are you using the right tooling? Is your CI/CD pipeline the right thing? How are you doing SRE? Are you meeting the plan that you set out for yourself? Go back and review those things and hold yourself accountable to it. All it leaves me to say is really thank you to Alex and Steve for their time today, and thank you for joining us. I hope that you found it useful. As I'm sure you're probably sick of by now, there is a survey. You can scan the QR code or go into the app for that. We do really appreciate the feedback. And I hope we've sparked some elements for yourself today, something that you can take back and put into practice in your organizations and really start your DevOps fires. Thank you.